Well, hello, church. We start a new year, and I have a new knee. How about that? And getting better, just kind of limping around a little bit, going to physical therapy, trying to take care of things, get it more limber, but doing pretty well. Hope you all had a marvelous, holiday season, Christmas time, and time, with family, and we start a new year, and excited to walk down this path with you guys for a little bit longer as we go into our studies. We are going to finish up the Book of Revelation, and today I'm going to give just a quick kind of summary overlay of chapters 17 and 18, which has to do with Babylon and the fall of Babylon, and what in the world is Babylon, and what does it represent, and how do we walk this path, and so just contemplating the fact that over this last year and a half or so, we've been discipled by the Apostle John. I love John's perspective, and it's the Word of God. It's good for all teaching and instruction, but we get that perspective from John, kind of started out as one of the sons of thunder, and then ends up to be the apostle of love. And we went through his epistles, and then we went through the Gospel of John, and now we're finishing up the Book of Revelation, which is his last writing, and the last writing in the book in the New Testament. Revelation is so filled with what I would say is hope for the end of the age, for the coming of the Lord, for the fulfillment of prophecy, in the Old Testament, and fulfillment of prophecy that Jesus gave in Matthew 24 and Luke 21, and we see this outlay of the message that was given from the beginning of time, from the book of Genesis all the way to the very end, and so I look at these scriptures, and I get encouraged by the fact that God has been faithful to fulfill His word, the prophetic utterance that has been given down through the ages. He fulfills every step of those prophecies. And there are a number of prophecies that just haven't happened yet because the Lord hasn't returned yet. And but boy, things are moving in a direction. And so as we finish up the Book of Revelation, I want to be able to look at this and say, how do we apply the teachings, the perspective, the instruction that John gave through these books and through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit? And so we come to this point where in 17 and 18, it's revealing it's revealing Babylon, and so we're gonna just take a look at a few of the things. But what I wanted to be able to do is take a look at some of the characteristics and the titles and what they kind of refer to in an overall perspective, not just from kind of our Western, Western worldview, which I'm not trying to say that, we're Western. This is who we are. We have a perspective. This is, what we bring to the table many times. But to pull back just a little bit and try to take a look at it through those apostolic eyes, through that first century, and through that kind of worldview that has to do with the redemption plan of God that includes the Jews and the land that they live in. And so, anyway, in 17, we start to see the perspective that John has of the enemy's systems and plans, and there is, I believe, there's quite a bit of instruction in that. And so I'm going to go through just a few things here. When we view Babylon, the Jews would have a perspective. If you remember that, Nebuchadnezzar came into Israel and took them captive. This was a marked moment for every Jew, including our friend John, would understand that Babylon represented something of captivity. It represented something of God's judgment. It represented a world system, and it represented a nation, but also a religious perspective that was not a follower of Yahweh or the King of Kings. And so we find these descriptions that are happening that would reverberate in the heart of a first century Jew that just doesn't have the same perspective as us. We might have a little bit of that perspective because the Gulf Wars and the Iraqi wars that we're dealing with, and that was Babylon, and it didn't work out so great for us in many ways. And there's probably something that speaks to us about that region of the world, and yet there's a deeper thing that would hit that Jewish heart that brings a greater understanding of what happened then, the enemy that was there, and you find a mixture of these perspectives in the book of Revelation, where you almost find a retelling of the judgments of God against the gods of Egypt in the Exodus, which is very evident and throughout the book. But you also find that there is a perspective that the enemy of Israel was Babylon, and what that looked like, and what are some of the perspectives that even go back to that. And so anyway, we start out where the description of the harlot that is Babylon, and she is a harlot. Now, and it talks about immorality. Also, it's one of the perspective or the characteristics of the end time Babylon. Now you have to go back and look at even some of the judgments upon Israel that harlotry and immorality, they certainly have to do with sexual sin. I don't want to downplay that at all. There are certainly manifestations of that, and we can see that in a worldwide thing. When you look at what Paul was talking about in the book of Timothy, where it says they were lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. But even that word pleasure goes beyond just the sexual desire, but it has to do with luxury and living in a pleasurable lifestyle, and that becomes the priority over God. And that's the thing that we see here in the Babylon at the end of the age, is that there's a connection between like God accused Israel of adultery because of their idolatry, and we start to get a little hint here that this isn't just about a secular perspective, but that this is about a world system that has turned toward idolatry. Idols that are set up in our own lives, but that are set up as a religious order at the end of the age. Stick with me a little bit. So we have this idolatrous system that it says that it is over many waters. It's a widespread thing that's transpiring. It's not just kind of localized, but it's over many waters. And then it talks about over many kings, and that many on the earth are bowing to this system. Certainly, it talks about the kings of the earth, and it could be that it's speaking about, John would have been talking about what surrounded Israel, certainly those kings that are around that area. But I think it's even more widespread. It becomes part of a global system. And that global system takes precedent in the lives of the people above and beyond following God and following his word. And those things become secondary or way down the line or totally repulsed by this new system, this system of an idolatrous worldview. And so I just want you to kind of, when you read through these two chapters, and this is the assignment for this week, is 17 and 18, just read through them. And, we want to be able to recognize a few things. And as you look through that, get the view that it's not just immorality in the sense that we think of it in our English language, but it has to do with giving over preeminence and giving over the idea that that the most important thing on the earth is this system. And so anyway, as we move down through chapter 17, I want to read just a little bit here. And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a cup of gold full of abominations. Now, I find that, really interesting that It has to do with luxury and authority on the earth. Um, this, this system. I don't know what else to call it, or religion, or however you want to look at it. Um, it is wealthy and has lots of luxury, but there's a cup that's filled with abominations, which is interesting. That um, an abomination has very religious ties, uh, because it is something that's contrary to the religious truth that is considered outside of truth and understanding. Um, and so, and it's filled with unclean things of her immorality. Again, there's this turning towards this um, prioritization of something that is that's an abomination. In the verse above that, it talks about uh, this spirit being in the wilderness, and this woman sitting on a beast that's full of blasphemous names. Blasphemy has to do with religion, has to do with an order of things, not just a secular understanding. And so our mindset is that, we look at world systems and we think they're just a secular mindset. It's just, worldliness. But boy, it seems like John is getting at something that's much deeper, that calls someone to a religious fervor, and something that's much that takes priority in the heart to the point where you're willing to give up life for it. And so upon her forehead was a name that was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. There is something that's that's represented by Babylon, but boy, it's a deep demonic thing that has transpired on the earth, and it's been around for a while. It's been around for a long time. It's a mystery, and it's Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. Speaking of even generational things, and so. And I saw the one drunk with the blood of the saints and of the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered greatly. Again, if we were to start to look and understand that the kings, that there are, 7 heads and 10 horns, there's this confederation of probably 10 nations that has 7 kings that are attached to them, and those kings gain ascendancy. And so if we start to look and go, oh my goodness, there could be a 10-nation confederacy that surrounds Israel, and that it's a religious form and order. That speaks of something. I know I've talked to you guys about about Islam, and the understanding that there's 1.6 billion Islamic people on the earth, and I don't want to be in the place where I'm just saying every one of them is just terrible evil. I've traveled in the Middle East, and there's wonderful people, and most of Islam is not living in that jihadist state. Most of Islam is in a place where they're just trying to live their everyday lives. Um, but there's a religious order here, and it's not the worship of the God of the Bible. It's a whole system that is set up that is now very wealthy, and runs much of the world's economic base. When you think about oil, that is needed everywhere. And so anyway, I happen to think that that's the case, that there is a 10-nation confederacy that will arise out of the old Islamic caliphate that fell in the early 1900s when they were ruling out of Istanbul, and that it will have to do with what's going on in the Middle East, but it will affect the rest of the world, and it will be it will affect how the world views things, and the luxury that's attached to that and the authority that is attached to that gets rooted in systems that are around the globe, as well as very located around Israel. And so my thought, I'm not trying to say that that's the answer to end all answers, but I'm just telling you to keep your eyes open for that kind of stuff. And so anyway, I know I've talked about this before, but there are those that are waiting in Islam for the Mahdi, and they're a minority of people that are there. 20 to 30% of Islam adheres to that, and to that understanding that they need to bring the Mahdi or the 12th Imam about by bringing violence to the earth and bringing down the Zionists, the Jews, and the West. And so that's not a great number. But if you do the math, and you got 1.6 billion people, and 20 to 30%, just say a quarter, or even if it's 20%, you're still talking about almost the entire population of the United States living in that worldview. So anyway, I think things are building in those directions, and that's why we keep our eyes on what's going on in the Middle East, because God is going to come back. The Lord is going to return. He's going to return to Jerusalem. He's going to return and restore the land of Israel. It means something. I also believe there's a time coming, according to Ezekiel, where those nations will gain ascendancy, and they will make a pact with the rest of the world, and everyone will be against Israel, and they will be pretty much wiped out, spread again in another diaspora. And I hate that, but I think that's a prophetic voice, and that the Lord is going to come back, and he's going to save the Christ followers that are held under a persecution in the world, and he's going to save Israel and become the Messiah to the Jew and the Gentile. So anyway, so we watch the development of this, of this beast, this uh, this uh, Babylon that is kind of this world system that is living in luxury, um, and this system, um, will be overcome, um, by by the Lord when he returns. Um, Now I'm going to read just a little bit further on here, verse 12. And then the 10 horns, which were the 10 kings, who were not yet received the kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour, which is that last little bit of time on the earth where there's going to be the great persecution. And these have one purpose, where they're given their power to give authority to the beast. And these will wage war against the Lamb. And the Lamb will overcome them because he is the Lord of kings. And those who are with him are the called and the chosen and the faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. It's this world system. And the characteristics of this world system are giving over to another god in idolatry, that they're giving over to luxury and immorality. They're given over to a perspective that the God of the Bible is not true. And so we're seeing some of these things happening even in our nation. And so anyway, I want to start to get through this a little bit more. So then there is a judgment upon Babylon at the end of the age. Now, I think that Babylon is this world system. But I also think that there's going to be a city that represents this world system that's put in place. And so it will be a system and a city. Now, there are a bunch of people that believe that it's going to be there's going to be a resurrection of the actual city of Babylon, and that it will represent something, that is enormous on the earth. I'm not sure that's the case. I don't know. Maybe it is. I would have a tendency to believe that it's the place that's the hub of the religion that surrounds Israel. There's one city that comes to mind, as far as I'm concerned, it is Mecca. But again, I'm not sold on that as the only perspective. But it's a possibility anyway. Certainly, Mecca represents a large worldview. And when you look at in our nation here, if you speak anything about Islam as not being the true religion, then you're Islamophobic. And there'll be times where that waxes and wanes, and I don't know how long we have, but we certainly have a number of years ahead of us. And so I find that there's a potential that there is a center of the religion, the false religion, which Islam is a false religion. I'm really sorry just to not everything in Islam is terrible. Some of the laws that are given are just like the Old Testament. They're valuable. Now, I'm not saying everything that has to do with Islam, you throw out the window, but the heart of the religion is a false god. It is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is not the God of the God the Father that we see in Jesus's life. It is not the God of John. And so so we find, Babylon the Great is about to be, at the end of the age, is about to be judged. And listen to the way it's described. And Babylon, she has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison for every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. Many times birds are representative as demonic forces. I don't know if you remember where it talks about the mustard plant, and then it becomes shade and the birds come in. There are representatives of birds throughout the New Testament as well as the Old. And I find it interesting is that this world system has become a dwelling place for demons. Now, that's not just secular. These things are pretty spiritual. It's talking about spirits that are dwelling on the earth, and that they're murderous spirits, and that they are drinking the blood of the saints and drinking the blood of the Jews. And if there's any religion on the earth that you could look at it and go, what religion hates the Jews and hates the Christians? It's pretty close to what we see. In particular, those that are on that extreme end of calling for jihad. And so there's a picture of her being judged, and there's economic collapse in the Middle East, but economic collapse that then will reverberate throughout the earth, and the kings of the earth will see this, and they'll be blown away. Starting verse 9, the kings of the earth committed the acts of immorality and lived sensuously with her. Now again, I'm not just talking about immorality like, sexual sin, even though that certainly is part of it. But this idolatrous turning where God created mankind in his image to have fellowship with him, and mankind has turned and now is worshiping another god. It's immoral. It's adulterous as far as the scripture goes. And living sensuously, it just refers to that luxurious lifestyle, that, opulence and, and money and power that usually has some manifestation of power over people that are less, that are less fortunate. And they will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning. And listen to this. This stuff, you see types and shadows of it in even in our own lives. Standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, "Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, For in 1 hour the judgment has come, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargoes anymore. You find that this city, this system, is buying up goods from around the world. They're not producing a lot of the goods and sending them out, but they're buying up all these luxury items. And when this economic collapse happens, then the merchants of the world go, wait, this is cutting off all the stuff that I've been selling. Cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and every kind of citron wood, every article of ivory, every article made from very costly wood, bronze and iron, and it goes into this, this long thing. And in verse 15, and the merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, woe, woe, the great city, she who has clothed herself in fine linen and purple and scarlet and adorned in gold and precious stones and pearls. Again, it's just this luxury, that is, it's not even talking about, grain and oil. It's talking about these luxurious items that are very expensive. For in 1 hour the great wealth has been laid waste. And every shipmaster and every passenger and sailor, as many as make their living by the sea, stood at a distance. Now, I know that doesn't make sense a whole lot, but when, you have those kind of items, they're being shipped across the globe. And they're being shipped on these giant boats, kind of like oil tankers, but they make their living from this. And I don't know if you remember the scenes from 9/11, where it's interesting that it was the trade centers that were hit. Just types and shadows. That wasn't the fulfillment of this, but certainly is a foreshadowing of something like that. The trade centers, the world trade centers were struck. And the boats were all sitting in the harbor there in the New York harbor, and they're watching the fall of these towers. And it affected the economy of the world. It's a foreshadowing. That kind of thing is going to happen at the end of the age. And I believe that the Lord is just going, hey, pay attention. Look and see. I'm going to be judging these things. So what are the characteristics of Babylon here? They sit at a distance. They're watching this, this happen. God's instructing his people in the midst of this to go, rejoice over her who heaven, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. And the sound of the harpists and the musicians and the flute players and the trumpets will not be heard in her any longer. No craftsman will be found in you any longer. The light of your lamp will go out. And in her, this very last verse of 18, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and all who have been slain on the earth. Again, I just look at that and I go, oh Lord. He's good to his word. This stuff is going to happen. And in the midst of that, we have to take into account what are those characteristics. It was setting other things before the Lord. That's how she lived. She lived in luxury and looked for wealth. She lived in immorality. So we find this world system that has another God, that lives in wealth, that lives in immorality, and immorality including sexual sinfulness. And it's entangled around the globe. Now, I don't know what we do about this kind of stuff. But in verse 4 of 18, it says, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins, and that you may not receive her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities.'" I find that to be convicting in my own life, because I'm forced to go, what does it mean to come out of her? How deeply am I entrenched in the world systems around me? How much do I prioritize things above and beyond the God of the Bible? How much do I fudge on the instruction that has been given to all of us? How much do I just say, things will always be the same, he is not going to come back, we have plenty of time? How much do I take and go, but the people that are all around me that don't know Jesus, they're in for really difficult things. How much do I hold back and keep my mouth shut, and I don't talk about the good news, or look at the gospel in the light of eternal life? How much do I just want to live in the comforts of my everyday existence in a Western civilization that's probably the wealthiest civilization that the world's ever known? And I hear that voice, come out of her. Don't participate in her sins. Now, sins are pretty specific. Those things are, things that are there. Idolatry is kind of the root of all of our issues. If I was to say that there's certainly Islam has a system and a religious system, and the wars that they participate in have to do with religion. And they're worshiping another God. But here we are, we're in the West, and I told you, we live here. We're Western, whether we like it or not. And there is great things and there is difficult things. But who and what is the God that we mostly serve here in the West? And I just want to tell you, I believe it's ourselves. It's just me wanting to sit on the throne. And my selfishness, or the selfishness of our culture. We want to rule. We're watching our culture go down a path where we don't want to follow this book, that old book that doesn't mean anything, that's um, obsolete, written 2,000 years ago. What's it got to do with us? The instruction that's given, that was for back then. This isn't for now. Matter of fact, I can choose whatever I want. I can choose to be whatever sex I want. I can choose anything that I want. And we sit ourselves on the throne and commit adultery spiritually by worshiping our own way above God's. If we're to take anything out of this, this thing about Babylon, and I think we certainly want to pay attention to things going on in the Middle East. We certainly want to understand a little bit of world systems. But do we take it down to me? To who we are? Do we sit that before the Lord and go, God, I really would rather follow your Bible and your truth than follow my own will and my own desire? I don't want to participate in those kind of things to where luxury and comfort become the priorities that I live for, rather than the things of the Lord, the instruction that he gives. So I will end on that note. We'll have a lot more to discuss. Babylon is, has been talked about for many, many years by many scholars who, over the years have, put things out there. And I know that I'm not have a full picture. But I do think that there are things that we can take away from this ourselves. And he's talking to us individually as well as a people. And he also is giving us hope, because the judgment is coming upon the world systems that we live in, and that he's going to set up a new one. And in the next few chapters, we'll see the new heaven and the new earth. We'll see the Lord coming. When I say new heaven and new earth, it's kind of remade. It's going to be like the days of the Great Flood. I believe that the Great Flood was a catastrophic worldwide event that changed the earth. It became a new heaven and a new earth. It wasn't, I would rather say, a remade heaven and remade earth. This ball that we're living on is going to remain. But some of the surface of it is going to look very different, because God is going to do things. And just like in the flood. And his return will be magnificent, spectacular, glorious, and terrifying at the same time. Well, God bless you guys. I will look forward to seeing you guys this weekend, and we will talk some about Babylon. All right. Talk to you soon. Love you all.